tied on the fringes of society, shunned even by their own battlefield, chaos, screams, steel tearing through flesh. A short sword slices, blood pours. Rome called it glory, but in that moment it felt more like hell. And then what? What happens to those who survive? Not the ones who die with honor, but those who return broken in body, shattered in mind. The empire honored its victorious generals with triumphal arches. It offered sacrifices to the gods after each campaign. But the common soldier came back changed, scarred, disfigured, carrying wounds no one wished to see. This is their story, the ones who made it home but never truly returned. We're going to step into the world of Rome's wounded, because the real face of war only appears after the fighting is over. Roman warfare was brutal and intimate, no safe distance, no time to breathe. Weapons struck with precision to reach vital organs. When they didn't kill instantly, they left scars that never faded. Spears and pila tore through flesh and bone, splitting limbs in two. Barbed darts bent on impact, impossible to remove cleanly, tearing through muscle and causing infections that spread quickly. And when the enemy was foreign, like the fierce Helvetii or the northern Cherusci tribes, their crude but vicious weapons could be even worse. Axes tearing off arms, maces shattering skulls, swords ripping open ragged wounds. Roman medical texts, like De Medicina by the physician Publius Varro, describe injuries beyond human tolerance, exposed entrails, shattered bones, torn faces. Many who survived the clash died days later from fever, infection, or the silent creep of rotting flesh. The wounded collapsed onto filthy ground, mixing with mud, excrement, and the blood of men and animals. If fortune favored them, they were dragged away to be treated. If not, they lay where they fell until the battle was done. For most, the pain didn't end with the fighting, it had only begun. Even when the body endured, the mind often did not, because there was another kind of war, one no one could see. Some soldiers returned without scars, without missing limbs, without any visible mark of battle. But something inside them had shattered. What we now call post-traumatic stress disorder existed in Rome, only without a name, without a diagnosis, and without compassion. These men lived in silence. They endured nights without sleep, sudden bursts of rage, irrational fears, and an urge to isolate themselves from everyone they once knew. Many could not reconnect with their families. Some rejoined the army, not from loyalty, but from desperation, because war was the only world they understood. Others vanished, wandering the roads of the empire until death claimed them. Roman culture had no understanding of this invisible injury. To admit weakness was suspicious. To show pain was a flaw in virtue. A good man was expected to endure anything with dignity, to suffer without complaint. The historian Marcus Valerius Crispus wrote of veterans from the northern campaigns who avoided festivals, shunned human contact, and would not speak of what they had seen, as if even remembering it was unbearable. They were alive, but part of them had died on the battlefield. Rome could forge soldiers. It could crush enemies, but it had no place for men broken on the inside. Pain that didn't bleed was invisible to the empire. When the pain did bleed, when flesh was torn and blood spilled, the ones who stepped forward were the Medici, the legion's military physicians. They were not healers in the modern sense. Their job was simple: keep the soldier alive just long enough to return him to the fight. Every permanent camp had a valetudinarium, a military hospital divided into areas for open wounds, fever, infections, and recovery. The Medici followed the teachings of renowned physicians like Publius Varro, Galen, and Dioscorides, using vinegar and wine as antiseptics and plants such as mandrake or willow bark to dull the pain. But when a wound was severe, there were no miracles, only fire and iron. Cauterization with red-hot metal stopped bleeding. If the wound began to rot, amputation was the only hope. The tools were crude bronze saws, iron hooks, rough forceps. The anesthesia, wine, or if fortune smiled, a natural sedative. The screams, according to accounts, could be heard across the entire camp. Mortality was high, but the medici were both respected and feared. They decided who could be saved, who would lose a limb, and who would not live to see the next sunrise. Even those who survived their knives faced another trial, the journey away from the battlefield. If far from a permanent camp, the wounded were moved under conditions we'd call torture today, stretchers made from cloaks and spears, ox-drawn carts with no suspension rattling over stone roads. Every jolt was agony. Roman logistics were efficient, but compassion was never the priority. In imperial times, permanent military camps became more common, and the valetudinarium was a standard feature. These crude hospitals had wooden beds, simple drainage for dirty water, and stocks of surgical instruments made of copper or iron. But even here, safety was an illusion. No one understood germs or bacteria. Infection was almost inevitable. A soldier could survive the enemy's blade only to be killed by invisible foes, the microorganisms festering in open wounds, soiled bandages, and reused instruments. Gangrene was the most feared killer. Without antibiotics, a simple puncture could blacken tissue and fill the air with the foul stench of death before fever set in. The pain was relentless, a burning throb that no herb could soothe. Chills, delirium, and the creeping spread of necrosis often ended in death. Roman doctors did what they could with what they knew: herbal compresses of elder, rue, and garlic, poultices described by Dioscorides. Sometimes they eased swelling, other times they only delayed the inevitable. Galen himself admitted that amputation was often the only choice, but even that carried the risk of septicemia, a body-wide infection that killed without mercy. Infection showed no favoritism, decorated veterans and raw recruits died alike. The battle against gangrene had no glory, no audience, no marble monument. It was silent, lonely, and cruel. Rome promised much to its soldiers, and sometimes it delivered. A legionary who survived 20 to 25 years of service could receive the missio honesta, an honorable discharge with land, a lifelong pension, and citizenship if he was a foreigner. Many settled in military colonies, living out their days as farmers, merchants, or local leaders. But most severely wounded men never made it that far. Those discharged early for medical reasons received the missio corsaria, symbolically honorable, but without the benefits of the missio honesta. It meant returning home maimed, with no land, no pay, and no official support. Some depended on family, others on the goodwill of commanders, and many on sheer luck. Rome glorified the warrior's strength, but rarely reached out to the broken. A few found new roles within the army: scribes handling the camp's records, instructors training new recruits, or guards for supply depots. Under organized emperors like Trajan or Hadrian, these reassignments were more common. But in times of crisis, such positions vanished. The worst fate was the missio ignominiosa, discharge in disgrace for cowardice, desertion, or dishonorable conduct. It stripped a man of all rights, erased his name from the records, and condemned him socially. Many who carried that mark lived and dn. For those unable to secure land, work, or a place in the army's machinery, survival became a daily battle. Some opened small taverns or repair shops. Others found humble public posts, market inspectors, city guards, assistants to minor officials. But many turned to darker paths. Still capable of holding a weapon, they became mercenaries for senators, aristocrats, or merchant caravans. Some entered gladiator schools, exchanging their suffering for coin and fleeting glory in the arena. Like the famed fighter Spiculus, rumored to have once been a soldier, they fought for cheers instead of causes, often meeting a quicker death than they had on the battlefield. In the great cities of the empire, it was common to see these former warriors begging in the streets, limbs missing, scars visible, eyes hollow. They had once marched with the most powerful legions in the world. Now they huddled in the shadows of temples, unrecognized and forgotten. Emperor Augustus once tried to solve this problem by creating the Aeraria Militare, a military pension fund paid for by taxes. Under disciplined rulers like Vespasian, it worked. Under others, like Nero, it was drained for luxuries. When crisis struck, those who could no longer fight were the first to be abandoned. Many died waiting for pensions that never came. Others simply disappeared into the anonymous crowd of the empire, their service unremembered. Rome built monuments, conquered kingdoms, and carved its victories in marble. But behind every triumph were thousands of broken men bleeding for an empire that cast them aside. This is not the story of generals or glory. It is the story of common soldiers who gave everything, only to return to silence, indifference, and poverty. Surviving Rome's wars was only the beginning. The hardest fight was against abandonment, pain, and, for many, oblivion.